Good evening again, and to you folks as well. Is the sound okay? Can you hear me okay back there? Well, in that case, I'm going to leave it right there because I don't like to wear that thing on my ears. But let's begin by giving each other some gifts, like the gift of a smile. Oh, come on, move your necks. You can do this. It's a good way to loosen up anyway. Smile at someone. If nothing else, you smile so people will wonder what you've been up to. Got some wavers here. Hello, waver. Hi. It's good to see you here tonight. Hope everyone's feeling well, doing okay. My talk tonight is called The Windmills of Your Mind. Now, for some of you, that's immediately going to bring up the lyrics of a song. It's probably going to be stuck in your head for at least the rest of the night, maybe the rest of the week. If so, I offer my humble apologies. The song's from the 1960s. As I look around, there are many of you here that have not heard of it. If you have, you're chronic YouTubers. The song was written by Alan and Marilyn Bergman, and it was written for the movie The Thomas Crown Affair, which was made in the late 1960s and made again in the 90s about a billionaire in mergers and acquisitions who owned a lot of things, but generally could not get satisfied regardless of how much money he had, his fabulous New York City apartment, his home on an island, his private jet, and on and on. He still wanted more thrills, more adventures, to the point that he was willing to risk stealing a valuable painting from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The theme song in the movie, The Windmills of Your Mind, basically describes a mind full of wondering, out of control, a mind that could not be satisfied. Now, the reason I got this song in my head is because of David Muir. If that name rings a bell, it's because he is the anchor person for ABC World News Tonight. And when they did the clip last week on the new Inflation Reduction Act, they were talking about things that would help in terms of the environment. And they showed these giant windmills, these great big turbines. And when I saw them, I thought of the giant ones I'd seen a few years ago on the plains of Kansas. And as I am prone to do, I got a song in my head, The Windmills of Your Mind. And I got to thinking about how sometimes the mind wanders and wanders and wanders to the point that sometimes it gets lost. And I said, wasn't there a song about that? So I looked it up and, of course, listened to the jazzy new version by Sting and delved into a quest to learn what I would like to have said to Mr. Thomas Crown about windmills of the mind. I want to read the words of the song before we get more into the actual Dharma talk, and maybe you'll hear some elements of where your mind has traveled before, as I did upon reading these words. Round, like a circle in a spiral, like a wheel within a wheel, never ending or beginning on an ever-spinning reel, like a snowball down a mountain or a carnival balloon, like a carousel that's burning, running rings around the moon, like a clock whose hands are sweeping past the minutes of its face, and the world is like an apple whirling silently in space, like the circles that you find in the windmills of your mind, like a tunnel that you follow to a tunnel of its own, down a hollow to a cavern where the sun has never shone, like a door that keeps revolving in a half-forgotten dream of the ripples from a pebble someone tossed into a stream. like a clock whose hands are sweeping past the minutes of its face, and the world is like an apple whirling silently in space, like the circles that you find in the windmills of your mind. Keys that jingle in your pocket, words that jangle in your head. Why did summer go so quickly? Was it something that I said? Lovers walk along the shore and leave their footprints in the sand. Is the sound of distant drumming just the fingers of my hand? Pictures hanging in a hallway, and a fragment of this song, half remembered names and faces, but to whom do they belong? When you knew that it was over, were you suddenly aware that the autumn leaves were turning to the color of her hair? Like a circle in a spiral, a wheel within a wheel, never ending or beginning on an ever spinning reel, as the images unwind, like the circles that you find in the windmills of your mind. The lyrics sort of take the mind all over the place. Caverns, tunnels, pictures hanging in a hallway. It's going every direction. And sometimes that's the way the mind is. But let's talk about windmills again for just a minute. A windmill is a structure that converts wind power into energy by means of blades, bands. But the term is also extended to wind pumps and those big wind turbines that I was seeing on television last week. They're becoming a major source of power, and they can be seen as one of the next steps of action amidst the rising concern over energy security, global warming, fossil fuel depletion. The largest producer of wind power in the world is, anybody want to guess? China. And second is USA. And together, China and the United States generate over 50% of the total wind power in the world. So just as a windmill or wind turbine generates power, the mind generates power as well in the form of thoughts that lead to actions, that lead to habits, and on and on. Probably the most significant sutta about the mind is the Satipatthana Sutta, the sutta on the four foundations of mindfulness, which are body, feelings, the mind, and dhammas, also known as categories of experience. The third section, the section on the mind, begins with a question from the Buddha. And how bhikkhus, does one in regard to the mind contemplate the mind? He then goes on to explain, here one knows a lustful mind to be lustful, and a mind without lust to be without lust. One knows an angry mind to be angry, and a mind without anger to be without anger. One knows a deluded mind to be deluded, and a mind without delusion to be without delusion. And one knows a contracted mind to be contracted, and a distracted mind to be distracted. So here we have three roots: greed or lust, hatred, anger, and delusion or ignorance. Later on in the fourth part of the sutta, which reviews the hindrances, we get more explanation about the mind and a deeper explanation of it. But here in this section on the mind, the emphasis is the simple recognition of what's going on in the mind. And what's going on with this windmill that's generating power. Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, one of the great Thai masters of the 20th century, and the author of the book, Seeing the Eye of Dharma, the book for our book study that's starting next month, was quoted by Joseph Goldstein in his book, Mindfulness, regarding his description of the manifestation of these three unwholesome roots. Buddhadasa described the tendency toward lust or desire as pulling in, the tendency toward aversion as pushing away, and the tendency toward delusion as running around in circles, like the circles that you find in the windmills of your mind. It was Joseph Goldstein who said, if you want to understand your mind, sit down and observe it. And that's what's being asked here by the Buddha in this sutta. Recognize what's going on in your mind and recognize it in such a way that you're not necessarily going deeper into it, but you can see what is and what isn't there. Now, there are many different words in the Dhammapada about the mind. And if you haven't got this one yet, I highly recommend Gil Fronsdale's translation. It's just a wonderful translation of the Dhammapada. But one particular verse stands out, verse 251, which says, there is no fire like lust, no grip like anger, and no net like delusion. Delusion, as Buddhadasa Bhikkhu said, the mind running around in circles. So let's talk a little more about a windmill. A windmill has to have wind in order to generate power. And can you imagine how much wind it takes to move some of those giant things? In the Satipatthana Sutta, in the discussion on the body, the sutta mentions 4 elements: earth, fire, water, and wind. The example given as to what is wind is the breath. So if we're going to know what is in our mind, we're going to have some sort of concept and recognition of what it is doing and what it is thinking, what's going on. And we need an opportunity to get a hold of that power source, to have some control of it. So we need to learn to utilize the breath in a positive way. A little bit of control, knowing when it's there and present, and knowing when we're not really noticing it at all. In his book on the 4 foundations of mindfulness in plain English, that's over here somewhere, this one, Bhante Gunaratana starts his chapter of the mind and consciousness with these words from the 2 kinds of thought sutta. The Buddha was explaining to his bhikkhus what he had done to overcome unwholesome thoughts that arose in his mind while he was still an unenlightened bodhisattva. It occurred to me, the Buddha said, suppose I divide my thoughts into 2 classes. On one side, I set thoughts of sensual desire, ill will, and cruelty. On the other side, I set thoughts of sensual desire, on the other side, I set thoughts of renunciation, loving friendliness, and compassion. As I abided thus, diligent, ardent, and resolute, a thought of sensual desire arose in me. When I considered that this thought leads to my own affliction and the affliction of others, it subsided in me. When I considered that this thought obstructs wisdom, causes difficulties, and leads away from nirvana, it subsided in me. Thus I abandoned it, did away with it, removed it. And further down in the sutta, whatever a bhikkhu frequently thinks upon, that will become the inclination of his mind. If he ponders renunciation, if he has abandoned the thought of sensual desire to cultivate the thought of renunciation, then his mind inclines to thoughts of renunciation. Mindfulness of mind. Whatever thoughts we cultivate frequently become a mental habit. And then further on in that same sutta, further down, the Buddha said, too much thinking, even beneficial thoughts like renunciation, compassion, and loving friendliness, tires the body and strains the mind. Ever get tired of thinking? Just wishing it would go away? When the mind is strained, the Buddha explained, it is far from concentration. So rather than thinking at all, the Buddha steadied his mind internally, quieted it, brought it to singleness, and concentrated it. And in the last paragraph of the Two Kinds of Thought Sutta, the Buddha simply admonished them to meditate. Meditate. Do not delay, or else you will regret it later. Now, in the Buddhist writings, the mind is sometimes described using animal metaphors. You may have read or heard that the mind is sometimes compared to taming a wild elephant, or the monkey mind, or as I like to call it, the puppy mind that just goes all over the place. You call it, they can't come back, or it won't come back. Roaming, roaming, roaming. Sometimes we're trying to meditate and the thoughts keep coming. Or maybe we're trying to fall asleep. And it's just on and on and on. Clearly, we need to know how to settle the mind down. And meditation is one of the important ways to do it, because it's at this point we have an opportunity to control the breath, be aware of the breath, and come back to the point where we can choose what's going into that windmill. Do we actually know what's going in? Do we have some control in such a way that we can put a lot of power or not much power? Or perhaps simply see that I finally got a little bit of control. I remember at Heartwood, Alexis, I don't know if Alexis is here or not. Alexis Stein, one of our Dharma leaders, was talking about how many breaths can you count without losing your mind in such a way that it's gone away. And I thought, well, I think I could do 30. Made it to 6. It's like, my goodness, that one was smart. But it's not that it goes away, it's that we bring it back. And a windmill generates power by what is harnessed. And we generate wholesome thoughts. We generate positive actions. We generate control of our mind when we can come back and come back and come back with an awareness that I have the power to do this. I can do this. So say you're sitting in meditation, a craving arises. The first thing you do is recognize, there it is. What's going on? But also realize the impermanence of this thought. It's not going to stay. Rises, passes away. You hear a sound. A car horn blows behind you. You know you've done nothing wrong on the road, and anger arises. You get irritated. You feel the anger has arisen. You can't predict when it exactly happened, but you know it is there. Perhaps you feel your hand moving into a certain position where fingers are extended that aren't traditionally extended. You can't predict how you're going to react, but you know you are angry. You might want to rely on impermanence to make it go away, but you might just need to come back to the breath and harness that power. Realize what's happening and take control of it. It can happen with your phone. Isn't it so much easier to pick this thing up than it is to put it down? You ever notice that? Especially if you have unlimited data. Leaving the television on, perhaps long after the program you were watching goes off. My dear father, rest in peace, watched more ball games than he really did, because the next game would come on and he would have gone to sleep in the third inning of the first game. That's what happens when you were a Braves fan in the bad years. Another part of addressing mind states has to do with the frequency of meditation. And Bhante Gunaratana reminds us that beginning every day with meditation gives us an opportunity to start our day with a primary focus, to become relaxed, to actually carry out first thing an intention. This is what I want to do. This is me taking charge of my day from the very first of the day. It can be deep insights that come during meditation, or it can just be seeing that we're finally getting to the point that we have a mind that we have worked on. I've done a little work. This dog is not completely trained, but this puppy's finally learning at least one command or two. Joseph Goldstein reminds us of a Tibetan teacher in his chapter on mindfulness, who describes the practice of liberation as short moments many times. Short moments many times. And he concludes his mindfulness chapter with another teaching he received during his early time of study. One thing you need to remember and understand is that you cannot leave your mind alone. It needs to be watched constantly. If you do not look after your garden, it will get overgrown with weeds. If you do not watch your mind, defilements will grow and multiply. The mind does not belong to you, but you are responsible for it. We are all responsible for the circles that we find in the windmills of our mind.